No, no, it's okay. I just let me check. Hi. No. Can you hear me? Yeah. Hear myself. So yeah. No, you're beautiful. Of all sports to do in the heat, besides swimming, of course, cycling is the best because you create a wind for yourself as you go. Compared to running, running is the worst. Testing, testing. Yeah, okay, you guys here? Not so good. How about now? Testing, testing. Better? Any better? I mean, we don't have a big auditorium. We're five rows. So how's this? Myrna, can you hear me in the back there? Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah. Well, if Myrna can hear me, and she's the farthest away, I don't know. We used to be there all the time. It was lovely. It was lovely, but then for whatever reason they said it's not available. So for whatever reason, I love this room. It's wonderful. You don't have to, you have natural light. It's comfort. It's cozy. It's nice, beautiful room. But you know what? Since while I'm waiting here, so if we're talking about hearing, my hearing is poor. I've been diagnosed with mild loss in one ear and moderate loss in another ear. It's not so unusual for people like myself who are over 35, But Apple sells these AirPods, and if you buy the AirPods, you could take a hearing test, and the hearing test will tell you exactly what your hearing deficiencies are, and it will adjust the ear pods, the left one and the right one, to match your weaknesses so that they act as a kind of hearing aid. Now, I won't say it's exactly like a hearing aid, but it's very close to it. And it also has a feature of being able to block out noise. Like, say, if you're in a restaurant, it'll block out all the noise around, so you could just hear what's doing in front of you. It's wonderful, with one small problem. The moment you cross the Canadian border, it doesn't work. That's right. It is only good for the US because in Canada, you must be a licensed audiologist to prescribe a hearing device. And since Apple is not a licensed audiologist, that product and there are many other ones that you'll see advertised on American TV that are similar. They work in a similar way. They're different a little bit, but they do the same job. The technology of today is so remarkable that the hearing test that you take with those earphones is equal to a hearing test. I've taken a hearing test in Costco. Costco in the US allows you free hearing tests every 2 years. And I've taken them 2 years, not 2 straight years, but 1 year after another. And they said to me, look, you have moderate hearing loss, but not enough to really benefit from a hearing aid. So I asked my wife to come in to speak to the audiologist because, of course, she doesn't believe me. The audiologist says he has, if he says he can't hear you, it could be because he's just not listening. That's the standard. That's the standard treatment that we get. But that's why when these AirPods came out, I said, wonderful. I could do it myself. It's something good. It's not a cheap plastic device. And it was really helpful. Anyway, One day Canada will approve these type of things because that's technology. You can't fight technology, you know? Did you want to make any announcements? Yeah. So we're going to start soon, so we'll.
Hey. Hello, can you hear me? Nice. Okay, a couple of little announcements. Next week, we have a French film, Lundi Cinéphile. It's going to be here because we don't have the auditorium, because you should all go see The Sounds of Music that the Dramatic Society is putting on. But next week, you shouldn't be doing that. You should be here watching Mon Gâteau Préféré. It's in Farsi and French. And then we have You've Got to Read This on the Wednesday next week. It's at 2 o'clock, and it's 4 librarians talking about the books you should be reading this summer. And then Dr. Joe is on June 1st. Yes, different date. June 1st, it's the Monday, and we're going to be up in the council chamber. That's it. Here is Mr. Dwoskin with In the Headlines.
Thank you. Dr. Joe gets good billing in the council room, but remember, he's a star. He's really a star. And nowadays more than ever, with the internet being full of all kinds of information, both good and bad, both true and false, he is consistent in providing understandable, truthful, and useful health information. So that's been his career path, and popularizers of medicine are very important because if people just hear mumbo jumbo coming from a doctor and they don't understand anything, then they'll believe whatever gets on the internet and has a lot of exclamation points. And, even though the doctor with 5 PhDs knows a ton more, if he can't explain it and he can't make it understandable and usable, then some guy with big exclamation points on a TV screen saying, don't this or do that, people fall for it because they just don't know any better. So that's why Joe Schwartz fulfills a very important role to make medicine, normal medicine, normative medicine, understandable and useful. So I always encourage you to go see him. And he's a good speaker and he's entertaining on top of things. So I had a couple of subjects I wanted to speak about today. One of which I mentioned, and by the way, before I do, I'm always open to taking suggestions for things you might want to hear about. So just let me know. So simple. The first one, I'm gonna, for now anyway, take our minds away from all the we'll call it excitement, but it's a bad word, excitement in a bad way, that we read in the headlines and watch on TV. And there seems to be nothing but negative news coming out all the time. You agree with that? War in Iran, war in Israel, a blockade of Hormuz, gas prices going up, shortages today. I read shortages of motor oil coming, shortages of jet fuel. Random or less random murders in a mosque in San Diego. Bad news sell. There's a phrase for it. What is it? What's the phrase called? It's like bad news sells, but there's a kind of a catchy phrase to that. So I said to myself, you know what? We'll go someplace else. And I came back from Portugal just last week, so it's so fresh in my mind. And I thought it'd be interesting to learn about this country, not because it's a vital country to determine the future of Canada or the future of the world, um, not because it has any phenomenal resources that the world needs, not because it's on the brink of war with somebody and somebody wants to take it over, which, by the way, I don't know if you were insulted, but I was grossly insulted when Trump said he wanted to make Venezuela the 51st state. And I said, what happened to us? Like, hey, we were at least make them 52. Why, how did we all of a sudden get bumped to the bottom, unless he forgot, that's very likely because he can't remember anything at all. So I did do a 2-week trip to Portugal. It's not the first time I've been there, and I think it's a worthy country to speak about because not because it's so in the news, but because it's so not in the news. So that's for people who are worldwide tourists, and I travel all the time. There's kind of A-listers and B-listers and C-listers, and everyone wants to see everyone wants to see the Colosseum in Rome and the pyramids in Egypt and the Arc de Triomphe maybe in Paris, and these are A-list type of places that people. Of course, if you go to Israel, the Wailing Wall, but there's lots of places in the whole wide world that are so interesting with their own unique cultures and histories that are not spectacular, but they're just really nice places to visit. Now, Portugal adds something to this. Besides being a nice place to visit, it has become one of the so-called in countries these days. So, what's an in country? No, a country that people speak about as a place, if I had to move somewhere, that might be a place I'd want to go to. Or if I have to spend the winter or summer someplace, that would be an interesting place to go to. Portugal is definitely on today's list of in places to go. And the attraction of the country is not specifically to people, say, here in North America. It's more of an attraction to people who live in Europe. And why is that? Because Portugal is part of the EU. The euro is their currency. So it's their euro. You don't need a visa to go to Portugal. They use the same money as everyone else. So it's very easy for a European from a wealthy country to move to or buy a second home in Portugal, which has better climate and a lower cost of living and a peaceful country, peaceful politics, um, no civil unrest, no specific prejudice against one group or in favor of another group. So that's why, being a kind of a plain white bread type place, it's attractive to people who are living in circumstances that are not like that. For sure, I, and maybe you guys, know people who before Trump would spend the winters in Florida and who say, now we're going somewhere else. We're not going to the US. And many of them said, we're going to Portugal. Many said, we're going to Portugal. Many said, we're going to other places like Costa Rica, maybe, or some of the islands, maybe, or Mexico. But some people say, you know what? If I go to Portugal, I get 2 for 1, meaning I get sort of culture and history, and I get mild weather at the same time. So that's why Portugal has become attractive not only to Europeans who have second homes there, but also to Canadians who say, "Look, let's try something different." So so that's those are some of the reasons why it's an interesting place to look at. But there's other reasons too. Um, Portugal and this is what Portugal is a kind of a lesson to us, a lesson to everybody of quote how the mighty have fallen, meaning that you could at one point, like the Greeks, run an empire half the size of the known world, and the next day, in the next couple of thousand years, be on the handout line from the European bank. Portugal, the same thing, although their grandeur doesn't go back 2,000 years; it only goes back 500 years. But for a brief time, they were the kings of the universe. They had the most advanced technology in navigation. They had the most widespread trading empire. They had a huge colonial system. And, by, we'll call it by the 1970s, they were the pity of all of Europe because people were just living in such a poor state. So in other words, what I'm saying is, what goes up can come down also. And it doesn't mean that Canada or the US is exempt from that, or Great Britain or France or any of the other, or Russia, or any of the other sort of powers that be. Because, time has a way of playing tricks on you, and there's always what's called a what's called a something to the mean. I'm missing the word now. Okay, so that's Portugal in a nutshell. Portugal is a country which is in some ways quite unique. One of the ways it's unique is that the boundaries of the country have not changed since 1100. Now, if you can tell me any country that's like that, that would be something. So, yeah, that's a long time. That is a very long time. So if we go like this, here. So this is Portugal. This is Spain, its big cousin. Not always a friendly cousin, but a big cousin. This is the ocean here. And starting up this way and starting out this way, this is the Pyrenees Mountains over here. And this is France on this side. And again, this is the Mediterranean here. That's the Mediterranean. And this is Africa here, Morocco. So you see, and this is all the Atlantic Ocean here. Something like that. This goes a little bit this way. And this is the Atlantic Ocean. Ocean, 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 ocean. So now you get the idea of where it is, right? Yeah. And you could see that it is really totally on the Atlantic side. Spain has part of it on the Atlantic side, like this, but a lot of it, this whole area here, is on the Mediterranean. So the Spanish climate is a lot warmer than the Portuguese climate because they're more inland, for sure, like this. They're farther from the ocean, from the sea, like this. And that's why, in general, Portugal does not have the extreme temperatures that Spain has, because it's just located on two sides close to the ocean, and the distance between here and here is not all that great. So that explains it. Now, of course, this part here is more green and hilly. This part down here is more sunny and mild. But that's, not a big, you can drive from here to here in a day. So something like that. Well, from here to here is about 150 miles-ish, 250 kilometers around. And from here to here is about 500 miles or 800 kilometers, something like that. So it's not huge. The population of Portugal is only 10 million. So, I mean, think of it, Israel's population is also 10 million. But it's no, it's way bigger. It's way bigger. Israel would be about this big compared to Portugal. About this large. Israel's 8,000 square miles. This one is, what did I say, 100 and It's I don't know, what did I say? I forgot now. 100 and I don't know, 100 by 500, somewhere around there. 60,000 square miles, something like that. This territory. So it's I mean, I can look it up. I don't know for sure, but in a day, yeah, if the roads are decent. From where? Yeah, Russia, Nikra to Eilat. Yeah, they have good highways though. You know, Russia, Nikra to Eilat is 300 miles, I think. This is about 800 miles. So maybe it's 2 days. Depends how much you drive, you know. Um, the other interesting thing about Portugal is that it really doesn't have any, quote, minorities. All the people who live in Portugal are Portuguese up until recent times when immigrants started coming in from all over the place. Okay, so it was at one point a very homogeneous country made up of just Portuguese people. Now let's talk a little bit about the Portuguese language, okay, because it's not the same as just Portugal. Portuguese language is about the fifth most spoken language in the entire world. So that's really important to know. And the reason why, even though these people have 10 million people, is Brazil, their colony in South America, has 250 million people. So that's 250 million Portuguese speakers right there. Then you've got all of its former colonies, most of which use Portuguese as the official language and either is the first or second language of the people living there. So who can tell me names of any Portuguese colonies? I mean, I'm not talking about Duluth and St. Lawrence. Duluth and St. Lawrence doesn't count. Where? Mozambique, for sure. Angola, for sure. Absolutely. So in Africa, you've got those two. Those are huge countries, huge. They both use Portuguese as their um, language of instruction in high school and in university. They use Portuguese as the language of government, but most people speak another language at home, but that's the kind of going out language, if you know what I mean. So those are two colonies, former colonies in Africa. There's more. In Africa, there's one called Guinea-Bissau. So that's on the first one that you come down to when you go down the coast of Africa. It's another Portuguese colony. And then we have Portuguese colonies. There were some in India, Goa, that Goa, the beaches and all that. And then there was Macau in China, next door to Hong Kong, which is a Portuguese colony. And then the Cape Verde Islands, which are kind of on the coast of Africa, somewhere around where my finger is here, somewhere there. Um, And then Portugal has part of the country itself has the Azores Islands and the Madeira Islands. Those two island groups are actually still part of the country of Portugal. And you might know that the Portuguese community in Montreal primarily comes from the Azores. So that's islands that are halfway in the Atlantic between Europe and America. And, the people who came to Montreal primarily come from there. And if you go down Saint Laurent Boulevard, you'll see the Azores flag sticking out of some stores and stuff like that. So that's a kind of an idea of how Portuguese spread as a language. It's also spoken in this whole region here. So this, if you draw a straight line from here up to the top of Spain, all this area here are Portuguese speaking, but they call it Galician. And they don't call it Portuguese. They call it Galician, like Galicia, but it's basically the same language. And if you go there to Galicia, which I've been to, you'll see signs in Portuguese and in Spanish. That famous, one of the world's most famous pilgrimage sites. Santiago de Compostela, that's located here in this part of Spain. So that's just a touching on the subject matter of Portugal. So then I have two other things to speak about. I just want to check my time. Okay. I want to speak about Portuguese history, and I want to speak about the Jewish community of Portugal. So those are the two things that I wanted to speak about, and of course they're intertwined. So the first kind of international people who got here were the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were remarkable, remarkable people. They came from Lebanon, pre-computer days, pre-iPad days, pre-anything, pre-motors, pre-anything. They sailed all the way from Lebanon through the Straits of Gibraltar, and they got up to the coast of Portugal over here. And we know that because if you go in museums, you see tablets and stuff written in Phoenician talking about different things. So they made it. Then the next big group that came were the Romans. Of course, the Romans had an amazing empire. The Romans, this was their extent of the empire on the west, but they also went up as far as the English-Scottish border in the north. So they went all the way up. The Romans were in England for about 400 years. They never quite got a hold of Scotland, stubborn people they are, but they managed to get all control of all of England, all of France, most of Germany, and everything all the way down through the Middle East, Turkey, going all the way to the Persian border and into Egypt, in Africa, through the Middle East, Israel. So they had a huge empire. Portugal was at the far end of it, right here, because once you get to this point here in the Atlantic Ocean, there's nothing until you cross the ocean and get to the Americas. So this is where the Romans stopped. The Romans brought Christianity to Portugal when the Roman Empire itself became Christianized. And then when the Romans were defeated and things started to fall apart, as they did fall apart, different kind of groups came to rule over, local kings came to rule over. But the next big event was, and you all know this, of course, is that when the Arabs invaded Spain from Africa in 711, they also came to Portugal. So the Arabs were in Portugal. In Spain, they were in Spain at the bottom for 700 years. They were in Portugal only for about 400 years at the bottom and maybe 200 years at the top. So they weren't as deeply entrenched there because there were Christian kings who tried to kick them out, and they gradually, piece by piece, got them to leave Portugal. But it was only around the end of the 1200s that the Portuguese, that the Arabs were kicked out of Portugal, but they lasted in southern Spain for another 250 years. So they made a very strong imprint on both countries, but their time is gone. So what happened to Portugal after that? I'm not going into any kind of, king this and king that, but it became an entity by itself. And so this border was set in the 1100s. And Portugal has the oldest treaty, an international treaty, the one that the US just tossed in the garbage can today with Canada, a defense treaty. Portugal has the oldest treaty in the world between two countries that is still valid. What do you think the other country was? So yeah, I'm not giving out marks. I'm not giving penalties. I don't have a ruler to come hit your hands. What do you think? What country is associated with Portugal a lot? Give me a guess. Spain. Okay, it's a good guess. Not a right one, but it's a good one. Give me another one. It's Great Britain. It's Great Britain. And why Great Britain? Because Portugal produced wine that the British loved to drink. And it's the easiest place to get to England. Just shoot up that a ways. And Portugal made port wine. Um, the name Portugal obviously has the word port in it, right? And the port refers not to the wine, but to the city of Porto, which is, the second or first biggest city in Portugal, right up there. Lisbon and Porto are about the same size. They're both huge by Portuguese standards. They're both wealthy by Portuguese standards. They're both growing really fast by Portuguese standards. And Porto was the shipping port for the wine coming from the Douro Valley, which is all this area in here. And the wine was aged to make it strong. So it wasn't really wine. It's like kind of, it's got 18% alcohol in it. So it's like, it's wine which has been evaporated and added brandy to it, and then it becomes port. So the British drank tons of this stuff. And that's why Britain and Portugal signed a treaty, which is still good today, which actually Britain acted on in some many different ways. Portugal became a very Catholic country, as Catholic as Spain, as Catholic as Quebec. There was no other competition for the Catholic Church in Portugal. They were the bosses. They ran things. There's a church in every town. Your churches are big. The style is different from our churches here, but basically the idea is the same thing. A very conservative Catholic country. So what did the people do there for all these hundreds of years? One of their big occupations was fishing, because obviously you could see where they're located. Portuguese fishermen came to Newfoundland way back when. They came to catch a cod off the Grand Banks, and cod is their national dish. So cod is the national dish of Portugal, but you won't find a single codfish hanging around Portuguese waters because they don't live there. They all live in the Atlantic. They live near Iceland. They live near Great Britain. They live near Canada. And Portuguese used to come to Canada. If you go in Newfoundland, there's lots of places called Portugal Cove and Portugal Bay and all that kind of stuff. And so they were there early on. By early on, we're talking the 1500s is when they were coming over there. Now, for whatever reason, because sailing was so vital to the Portuguese economy, they got good at it. They developed good navigation systems. And they were the ones who said, you know what? It's not very far to get down to Africa. Once we get here, let's see where we can go. Okay? So, there was several Portuguese navigators, one of whom was Magellan, who was the first one to go around the world. Another one was Vasco da Gama, who was the first one who discovered that if you go around Africa, there's a bottom to it, and then you can go up the other side and end up in India. So once he made that discovery, and they were the ones also, the first ones to get to South America. Why? Because Brazil is the closest piece of South America to Europe. You remember, Brazil sticks out a lot. Oops. Brazil sticks way out like this into the ocean, like that, right? And in Africa, so Africa is how shall I put it? Okay, let's Africa goes like this, and it comes up here, and then the Strait of Gibraltar, and here Portugal is kind of over here. And all of this here is the ocean, 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 right? You know that Africa has a kind of a bend. It's a much bigger bend than this, right? You know what I'm talking about, a big bend, right? This piece of South America fit exactly into that bend. So that's how they were. It was a united place, you know, millions and millions of years ago, and the fit is perfect. And they've actually done research to match rocks from here to rocks from here, and they see it's the same rocks. So it's like really quite something else. But if you're from Portugal and you're going across the ocean, boom, the first place you're going to hit is here, because you're not going to go all the way this way, because if you keep going this way, the rest of South America is where my hand is. Brazil is really close. So that's why the Portuguese were the first ones who got to Brazil. They claimed it for themselves. The Spanish then followed. They had a fight between Spain and Portugal. Who should own South America, Spain or Portugal? Guess who decided? The Pope. They went to the Pope. And they say, Pope, who should own South America? And what the Pope, but nobody knew exactly where South America was in relationship to Europe. They knew it was west. They didn't know how far west, right? So the Pope made a line, something like this, and said everything on this side of the line belongs to Portugal. Everything on the other side of the line belongs to Spain. As it turned out, most of the South America is on this side of the line, but nobody knew that in those days, right? So that also, this treaty also is a treaty that kind of gave to Portugal what parts of Africa it wanted, and told Spain, this doesn't belong to you, because as far as the Pope was concerned, nobody owned Africa. Forget the Africans, they are nobodies, right? So as far as the Pope was concerned, Portugal could take everything on this side of the line, and Spain could take everything on that side of the line. That was something that was a treaty in the late 1400s. So Vasco da Gama set out from here. He went here, then he went down here. He went all the way around the bottom of Africa in 1487. This is an amazingly important date in world history, because once the Europeans could manage to go around Africa, they didn't need to pay the trip from China across Asia to get to Europe, to have tea, silk, porcelain, spices, all that stuff, you know, to load it on camels and horses and pay tolls every 200 miles, and, you know, it's a long time. If you could just put it in a boat and just sail it, you know, in a month's time, you could get from China to Europe. And that's what broke the power of the Silk Road. That's what broke the power of all the Muslim empires in Central Asia, was this whole idea that you can get by boat. So where did the Portuguese go once they got around Africa? Remember, you said you were right. This is Angola over here. On the other side of Africa is Mozambique. They got to Indonesia. That was the big payoff. That was the gold mine. Indonesia, they have one island called Flores, which means flowers in Portuguese. They got to Indonesia. They got to Taiwan. What's the former name of Taiwan that we used to know? Formosa. What does Formosa mean in Portuguese? Beautiful. That's what it means. Formosa means beautiful. So they got there. They got to China itself, in Macau, like I was saying. They got to the Philippines. They got everywhere in Asia that you could possibly imagine. And they set up trading posts. They set up trading posts all over the place. There's one trading post we were supposed to visit here. By the way, a week from Wednesday, I'm going on a cruise, starting in Cape Town here, all the way up the coast of Africa, all the way up, and finishing where? In Lisbon. So that's like 25 days. one of the places that they were stopping at in Togo is called Porto Novo, which in Portuguese means, of course, new port. So they were everywhere and they were first. So not just being everywhere, but they were first to be everywhere. And they're the ones who set up very lucrative trading empires, trading all kinds of good things from Southeast Asia, like spices. Spices and pepper were worth fortunes in those days. And they were the ones who made money trading all that stuff. Things from Brazil that they got from, hardwoods and agricultural things, all came that way from all their colonies. So they had an enormous colonial empire at one time. And they hit their heights in the 1500s. That century was their height. Okay. But, they're not that big. So Holland took over, Spain took over after them, Holland took over after them, and then England took over after them. So, eventually they became kind of like frozen in place. We'll put it like that. So now I'm going to talk about the Jewish community of Portugal. And why I'm going to talk about it is because I visited the most amazing community I have ever seen in my life, and I told some of you about it. So we all know that the Jews came to live here under the Roman Empire. And especially after the temple was destroyed in 70 AD, Jews were scattered all over the Roman Empire. But they were living, abroad before the Roman Empire, before the collapse of the temple. Some people said, well, they could have come with the Phoenicians because they were neighbors, maybe. But they certainly came with the Roman Empire because the Roman Empire needed traders, they needed linguists, they needed people who could fit in different cultures, and the Jews were there to do this job. The golden age of the Jews, what we know of today, the golden age of the Jews was in Spain. After the Arabs conquered Spain, they had a very tolerant society for the most part, with very small exceptions from 711 till 1492. So you're talking now 780 years. The Arabs ruled Spain, not all of it, but they got up to here and they slowly got pushed down from the north to the south. In those 700 years, Jews managed to live every single place in this territory. It wasn't called Spain and Portugal in those days. It was called Al-Andalus. That's the Arab name for Spain, like Andalusia. And the Jews did everything. They weren't only so-called high-end jobs. They did low-end jobs. They were farmers. They were shopkeepers. They were artisans. But they were also teachers and professors and doctors and lawyers and all that kind of thing. And there were hundreds of thousands of them, not a small community. And some of them reached very, very high positions in the empire. Now, the beauty of this was the luckiness, you will say, of the Jewish people living in Spain in those days. What were that there were also Christians living there. So the Christians didn't get kicked out by the Muslims, and the Christians and the Jews were not forced to convert by the Muslims. There were periods here and there in the 700 years. There were a few periods where some sort of Taliban style people took over, but they got kicked out pretty quick, and then the old ways started over again. The proof of the pudding is if you go to the Alhambra in Seville, this gorgeous, gorgeous building with fountains and mirrors and all kinds of stuff, decorations. I mean, these are not hardline people who could build this kind of gorgeous structures like that. So what happened was, like I was saying, that Portugal got so-called liberated from the Muslims 200 years before Spain did, the bottom of Spain did. But the Jews lived a great life in Portugal. I'm sorry? The Inca. Yeah, we're not there yet. We're not there yet. Okay, so we're in the 1200s and 1300s. So yeah, the Jews lived a great life in Portugal. They had high positions. There were not nearly as many as there were in Spain, not nearly as many. But, they had good positions, especially in this whole idea of the trading empire that they had. They were, they had a place for themselves. Now, comes 1492, that famous year. The alliance, this part of Spain is called Aragon. This part of Spain is called Castile. So there was a King Ferdinand of Aragon and a Queen Isabella of Castile. They got married. And they said, our job is to kick out the last Muslims who were running Spain and Granada. And they joined forces, and they actually defeated the Muslims in 1492 and kicked them out. As usual, if you say, well, how come? It's the old story, because the Muslims were not properly united among themselves. They were fighting, different kingdoms were fighting each other. They weren't, they were dealing with different Spanish kings at the same time as they were fighting each other. So, the usual rotten politics and lack of unity is what's responsible for their defeat. But they were defeated. Somebody's phone. Let's figure out who it is. First, we'll find out whose it is. Then we'll turn it off. That's okay. It's Rogers wanting to see if you're interested in upgrading your phenomenal plan that they are offering you. And for only $20 a month more, we'll give you nothing. But it's okay. Stop ringing. It's there somewhere. You know you have it. And it's so stupid. I was supposed to bring it and I didn't bring. I have my phone. I didn't bring it. So let's go back to 1492. The Muslims are defeated. Okay, the kings of the last kingdom, they go to Morocco, right next door, right across the street. No big deal, right? But what about all the Jews and Muslims still living in Spain? There were more Muslims living in Spain than Jews living in Spain at this time. And the king and queen of Spain said, we want to make Spain a 100% Catholic country. And that was, they did this. I mean, for us, it may be hard to understand from our point of view. But you have to understand that those people were very, very religious. Let's give credit where credit is due, so to speak. They weren't there just to take people's money, but they were also had a belief that Jesus and God wanted them to take over the whole country and make it a 100% God-fearing Catholic country. I mean, when the Spanish went out to South America, or when France sent people to Quebec and to the other places, what was the job? The job was to take power for the mother country and bring Catholicism to people to save their souls, to help them, not to conquer them, not to make them slaves, but to help them reach God. I mean, that was like the twin jobs that they had, and they believed that. I mean, the heroes of Quebec, Jean Mance and all those, their jobs were not to be soldiers. Their jobs were there to convert the indigenous people, whether they liked it or not. So the same thing happened in the minds of the king and queen of Spain. So they had two communities that were not Catholics. Who were they? The Jews and the Muslims. Which community was more powerful? The Muslims, of course, because there were so many more of them, number one. Their guys just got over the border here into Africa with weapons. They sure didn't want to start persecuting Muslims and have a re-invasion of Spain by their compatriots who just, stepped over the 3 Mile Straits here. It's a nothing. If you think the Strait of Hormuz is narrow, you should see this place here. So they decided to start picking on the Jews instead. The Jews had no defenses, no mother country to help them. They had no weapons, right? In many different ways, and they were a richer community, and they were more easily got to. So that was the first one they picked on. And of course, as we all know, they gave the Jews who were living there since the year zero, meaning 1,500 years, they gave them 1 month, 3 choices: leave the country in 30 days, convert to Catholicism, or be killed. And the be killed choice was never one that was accepted. So it was really 2 out of 3. Either leave the country or become Catholics. Many left. Many left. Now, if you're leaving Spain, what's the first place you're going to go to? Right, it's like right over the border, right? What did the King of Portugal say to the Jews? Hey, fine. The Jews that live in Portugal are great citizens. You can come live here too and be great citizens. But since you're so desperate, we're going to collect a toll for you to cross into Portugal, number one. And if by some chance you don't have any money, better off that you leave Portugal. We're not kicking you out, but better you should leave than stay. Go someplace else. And that was what his name was King Manuel. That's what he did. And so he said to all his ministers, wow, it's like, look at this luck that we lucked into. All these Jews who were so smart and so educated. Who could read and write in those days? Only the Jews. There was no education for Catholics. The priests got educated to deal with the religion, but day-to-day people, they didn't learn how to read or write. So the Jews were considered an asset by King Manuel, who gave them permission to stay in Portugal. Now, there was competition, of course, for these Jews. The Ottoman Sultan, who got into power in 1514, he said, hey, you know what? These Jews are phenomenal people. Let them come and live in my kingdom and practice their religion as much as they want, and they will be free to do whatever they want and live their lives peacefully. That was a great offer. But the only problem is that the Sultan was living in Constantinople, and here the King of Portugal is right next door, making a slightly worse deal. So many went to the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire in those days was huge. It was all of Southeastern Europe, Bulgaria, Romania, Yugoslavia, Albania, Greece, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, Turkey, Egypt, North Africa, not North Africa, but parts thereof. So it was a huge empire, and many Jews did go to live there. Primarily Cairo, Salonika, Greece, Istanbul, Turkey, Sofia, Bulgaria, Damascus, the big cities of the Ottoman Empire. That's where these people went to live. And there were already established Jewish communities there. So to fit in was, and also in Venice, for example. They also went to Holland. They also went to London. So these were not in the Ottoman Empire, but these were also cities welcoming Jewish refugees from Spain. So what happened to the Jews who came to Portugal? Something bad happened. And it had to do with marriage again. the daughter of these two bums, Ferdinand and Isabella, ended up marrying the King of Portugal in 1497, 5 years later. And guess what she said? I'm not living in a country full of Jews. Get rid of them. Okay. Now, Manuel, definitely had second thoughts because he said to himself, okay, I know my in-laws are so powerful. I don't want them marching into Portugal with their armies, right? On the other hand, these people are like peaceful tax-paying citizens that are creating wealth for the country. I don't know what quite to do. So his wife prevailed. They had an edict, the same edict that said, all Jews have 30 days to get out of Portugal or convert to Catholicism. Same two choices. Except it was not done in the same way. The king advertised that there would be boats waiting in Lisbon harbor to take the Jews away from Portugal. But he didn't want them to go. So what happened was, when they got to Lisbon, and when they got down to the port, the ships were all blocked off. And what they had was an enormous, and I mean an enormous square. You can imagine one of these European squares. You can imagine thousands of Jews standing there with their suitcases. Way up at the top of the square was a priest shaking some water, and he said, "You are now all Catholics." Okay? And the king said to them, "Listen, guys, here's the deal. Do whatever you want inside your houses, but when you're outside, act like you're Catholics, and my wife will be happy, because I don't want to lose you as citizens." So it was a kind of forced conversion, but not exactly. That's how it started off to be. Unfortunately, it didn't last. Somebody mentioned here, the Inquisition got started. The Inquisition really got started earlier, in the 1100s, but it got started up north. What was the job of the Inquisition? Was it to convert people to Catholicism? No, not at all. Was it to take a Protestant and make him into a Catholic, or take a Jew and make him into a Catholic? No. They had no jurisdiction over people who were not Catholics. The only jurisdiction they had were for people who were Catholics. But here's the problem. The people who were Catholics, like many of these Portuguese Jews and Spanish Jews, were Catholics on the outside, but Jewish on the inside. So that already really goes, it's like being treasonous, right? It's like being sacrilegious. You're praying to a different God, and here you're supposed to be a Catholic. So the job of the Inquisition was to find out who is doing this and to punish them, and to set an example for other people not to do the same. So how did the Inquisition know, if you're all Catholics on the outside, if you're all going to church, how the heck are they going to know who's practicing anything on the outside? Who's practicing Judaism on the inside? How would you know? What you needed were tattletales. And tattletales was their stock in trade. So they would give rewards to people who could sniff out Jews. And what they had was, and I saw this with my own two eyes, in the wall of a church, you had what looked like a mailbox, just a slot. You just put an anonymous letter as you're walking by, boom, you throw it in the wall. The other side, the priest reads it and says, "I think that Jacob down the street is actually a practicing Jew." Okay. So they send out, of course, the police force. The Catholic police force brings this guy in and says, "We have it on information that you're a practicing Jew." "Oh, no, I'm not." "Oh, yeah? Sorry, but the information we have says you are. We'll get other witnesses to find out. We'll get some relative of yours who converted, but who's actually a Catholic, to squeal on you. When worse comes to worse, if we don't get the information we want, we have a whole torture chamber to torture it out of you." And I have seen the torturing devices that are as bad as you could possibly imagine. So here was the punishment. The punishment was as follows. If you were high enough and you had friends in power enough and paid the church enough, they would let you go. Or if you were just like a plain nobody, like a maid or somebody who didn't know any better, they might say, okay, we'll punish you by making you a slave. But if you were anybody else, you had two kind of choices. You could admit, yes, you're right. I really was a practicing Jew. At that point, they would hang you and cut your throat. But if you said, no, I'm not a practicing Jew, you're all wrong, then they burnt you alive at stake, called an auto da fe. So those are the two choices that they had, which of course you could realize are not choices at all, right? So that was the Inquisition that started in the 1100s to look for secret Jews. When did the Inquisition formally get abolished by the church? 1831, if you could believe it. 1831. Now, many, many Jews from Spain and Portugal left Spain and Portugal because they were told to leave. But where did they go? They went to South America and to Brazil. What they figured was, okay, we have all of our connections here. We have our language and everything. They're not going to come after us. Sure enough, the Inquisition, Columbus just hit an island in Bahamas in 1492. In 1530, there was the first burning at stake in Lima, Peru, and in Mexico City, the two capitals of the Spanish Empire. So that means that the Inquisition followed the rule of Spain and Portugal into the New World. And it was not easy for the Jews to hide. It was easier, but it was not easy for them to hide there also. Okay, let's go back to the Muslims. What happened to them? The Spanish were a lot gentler with the Muslims for political reasons, like I said. What they told the Muslims was, okay, you're allowed to live in Spain as you are, but you can't live where you are. We don't like the idea that there's big Muslim community in Cordoba, a big Muslim community in Seville, a big Muslim community in Granada, a big Muslim community in Toledo. We don't want that. If you want to continue living in Spain, you got to go live in the middle of nowhere up here someplace. So some of them, of course, left. They weren't threatened to be killed. A lot of them just left on their own because it was so easy to go here to Morocco. That's exactly where their ancestors came from. That's their language was there, their religion was there. They had a place to go to that was theirs. Let's put it like that. But in 1605, so that's again 100 and something years later, Spain said, okay, that's it for the Muslims. You're gone. We don't want you here anymore. And that was it. They all had to leave. But, like I said, it wasn't like this trauma. It was a trauma to the individual family. It wasn't a trauma to the whole nationality because there's just so many of them that were right across the ocean, right across the straits here in Morocco. This is all Morocco here, this part here. So, and it was from the Moroccan kings were the ones who came to Spain. It wasn't the ones who came from, the Middle East. It was Moroccan emirs who came to take over Spain. So that was the end. By 1600, there were officially no non-Christians living in Spain at all. So that was a story. The Jews went to to Holland. They went to England. They went to Turkey and all that. What language did they speak when they left Portugal? Portuguese. What language did they speak when they left Spain? Spanish. You think they forgot Spanish the moment they got on the ships? No. They kept on speaking Spanish in Jewish communities until the mid-1950s, the mid-1900s, wherever they went in the empire, in the Ottoman Empire. That's an amazing thing. You don't have to go very far from here to find the Spanish and Portuguese synagogue. There's a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue in New York City. There's a Spanish and Portuguese synagogue here in Montreal. How'd they get those names? Because Spanish and Portuguese Jews were the ones who founded them. Now, they didn't go from 1492 and 1497 to Montreal. There was no Montreal in 1497, okay? So they had to go a little bit sideways. They went to Holland and they went to London, those two places. From there, in the 1700s, they got to New York and to Montreal. Interestingly enough, remember I said that, where, next page here. I'm gonna finish very, very soon. But so here's Brazil. Remember this whole big piece is Brazil, right? Remember here's Portugal, here's Brazil. So in the 1600s, the Dutch conquered Brazil. The Dutch conquered Brazil from the Portuguese. All of a sudden, Jews started coming out of the woodwork. All of a sudden, Jews said, hey, guess what? You know, the Dutch were the most tolerant people in Europe at the time because, for a simple reason, they had a Protestant community and a Catholic community. So it wasn't like just one or nothing. And the Jews all of a sudden said, okay, we're Jewish, we're here. We're here and we're strong. They set up a synagogue in Manaus, in Recife, in the communities along the, in those days, it was rubber that was the gold of Brazil, rubber, right? So they had communities along the river here where the rubber trees grew. Everything was great for 20-something odd years. And then in 1654, unfortunately, the Portuguese retook Brazil from the Dutch. What happened to the Jews? They did not stay. They said, oh my God, now everybody knows who I am, right? So they went to the Dutch colonies of the West Indies, Aruba, Curacao, Saba, all the Dutch islands in the West Indies. And what else was Dutch in the 1600s? New York. New York City was Dutch, right? Until 1774, New York, until 1674, New York was Dutch. So the Jews went to New Amsterdam. They said, hey, we're coming from Brazil. We're coming from Curacao via Brazil, from Curacao to you, and we want to settle here. And, you know, Peter Stuyvesant, the mayor or the governor, said, no, I don't like Jews. And they said, oh, please, you know, we promise not to, you know, be a burden on the purse. And he said, okay, so long as you don't cost us a dime, you can come. No, actually, that's not what happened. What happened was the Jews wrote a letter to the Dutch West India Company in Holland and said, hey, I know XYZ on the board of directors. Your little nobody running New York City is telling us we can't come. You better tell him to change his mind. And that's what happened. So he changed his mind, and the Jews were allowed to come to, because the Dutch had a Dutch West India Company for the West Indies and a Dutch East India Company for Indonesia. And, you know, that's what made Holland rich. So that's how they got there. Anyway. So I'm just going to finish off by saying about this community. So there was a community in the middle of nowhere in Portugal, which is here. The community is called Belmont, like Belmont Park, with an E at the end. For some crazy reason, Jews who were living around ended up coming to this tiny little village of several hundred to 2,000 people in Portugal, far, far, far from the coast, far from the Inquisition, far from anything. Dirt tracks, that's all they had going there. There were several hundred of them who gathered themselves in Belmont and surrounding villages and practiced Judaism from 1497 until 1910. Now, all that time, the religion had no books, of course, no rabbis, of course, no teachers, of course, no Torah, of course. They had nothing. Remember, they were all Catholics, all baptized, all going to the church on Sunday like everybody else, right? But in their homes, the women kept the religion and passed it down to the daughters. Now, there's lots and lots of cases around like in New Mexico and in Arizona and places in the Spanish world where people say, I remember my grandmother lighting a candle on Friday night, but I don't know anything about it. It's like a lost memory. These people were not lost. They said they're Jews. They lit candles every Friday night. They didn't eat pork because they could hide what they're eating. They made sausages that looked like fake pork and hung them outside. They made matzah. There's videos. You just look up a video, Jews of Belmont. They made matzah inside the house on a kind of a roof tile with slots. They just put the matzah in standing up like this. It didn't look like our matzah, but it was their kind of matzah, right? They also mixed up some of the holidays. For them, Queen Esther was very important. The fast of Esther was very important. Why? Queen Esther pretended she wasn't Jewish. Remember, she married the king of Persia as a non-Jew. So for them, this was a heroic person. They fasted on fast days that they could remember. They kind of kept Shabbat as they could. So what it was like a simplified, broken telephone kind of Judaism. So you know what broken telephone is? Like if you start here and you say the same word, and 400 years later you come over there, you're not going to get the same thing as what you started from, right? And because it was women who did this, it was kind of like a sorority who kept this. But they all married each other. They didn't marry outside. So they really were a community. And if you ask them, are you Christians? They would say yes. If you ask them if they're Jews, they would say yes. Now, the people who lived there in those villages that weren't Christian never ratted them out to the Inquisition for whatever reason. Either because they were just so far away and they knew these people so well that they just lived in their own communities and that was that. That's probably the main reason. Or the Inquisition couldn't be bothered to go up there, which I don't believe, because they'd walk up a mountaintop to find somebody. But that's how they lived until a Portuguese-Polish engineer named Schwartz was sent up here to build a road. And he comes up, and he's looking at these people, and he's looking and looking. He says, tell me, are you Jewish by any chance? They said, of course we're Jewish. And that's how the word got out. And he said, of course, I'm Jewish. And I'm going to tell you what Judaism is. Rabbis came from Lisbon to go visit them. And the community stayed the way they were up until today. Now, of course, when contact was made, Israel sent over all kinds of representatives. They built a school for them. They built a synagogue for them. They were formally converted because they were also baptized. So they were converted back to Judaism, the ones who wanted to. Some changed their practices to regular Judaism. Some said, I'm doing things the way my mother did and I'm not changing anything. And some kind of mixed half and half. Now, what happened was that because they were living in, I would call it the equivalent of Beit Como or Setil, and Israel comes to them and says, hey, come to Israel and we'll give you a good life, many of them moved to Israel. But there's still a community, there's still a big synagogue, there's still a big menorah in the center of town. There's an amazing Jewish museum that tells the story of this people. And if you look online, on the YouTube, Jews of Belmont, you'll see exactly what I'm talking about. I met one of the guys who I saw in the movie. The women all got dressed up in white. They had a whole elaborate system of washing clothes, which I don't know what connection it has to Judaism, but to them it did. It meant something to them how they washed their clothes. That's the story. I don't believe they were circumcised because who's going to do it? You see, it's amazing that you go there today, and what you'll find there in this village are Israelis. You know, there are many. I'll finish with this. Many Israelis are leaving Israel. 2025, 125,000 Israelis left because of the situation and people who are not happy with the government there. And so where they could go, among other places, is Portugal. Portugal agreed to give every Sephardi Jew the right to come and live in Portugal and get eventual citizenship. So all you had to do was prove that you were a Sephardic Jew. Didn't matter if you're of Spanish origin or Portuguese origin, because the Spanish Jews came to Portugal anyway. And they gave out citizenship. Once you get a Portuguese citizenship, you can go live anywhere in Europe if you want, right? It's EU. Um, but many Jews, to this day, many Israelis decided to move to Portugal. I met some of them in Belmont. And they said, yeah, we know it's out of the way, but you know what? It's a Jewish community who's lived here for so long. They have a synagogue. Jewish tourists are coming to visit. Why not? That was his. I spoke to him in Hebrew, the guy. So that was that. It's a fascinating story. If you're interested, just look up on the video Jews of Belmont, Portugal, and you'll see interviews with them, and you'll see the story, their story. They have a statue of this guy Schwartz in their little museum because he's the one who, quote, discovered them. They have pictures of matzah that they made. They have pictures of, they lit their candles with these kind of triangular covers. So the candle would burn, but you wouldn't see the light from the outside of the house, from as if you're lighting candles. It's really quite amazing. They made sausages with tons of garlic, so they would smell like pork sausages, but they were not, and put red powder on them to make it look like if they were pork sausages. They were made of chicken or something. So that's a story. I was just going to make one quick note about the primary elections in the U.S. today. It's probably the biggest day of the year for them. And we'll speak about that maybe next week, because the whole American system is so cockeyed and so divisive that this idea of a primary, meaning that members of the party choose who their candidate is going to be, and that candidate for whatever party has a 90% chance of winning. So therefore, what happens is that more and more radical candidates get picked because they know they're going to either win or lose anyway. So they might as well go with the real thing and not with somebody who's moderate. So there's a big one in Kentucky. This Thomas Massey, who Trump hates, and I mean hates, because he just doesn't believe Trump is worth anything. And he does anything on his own. He doesn't believe the U.S. should spend any money either. Anytime a bill comes up to spend money, he says no. He's the most anti-Israel Republican in the whole chamber. So, and has been associated with, whatever that means, white supremacists and all these other crazy people. Oh yeah, Trump hates him for a million reasons. Just because he can't control him. He can't control him. Massey says, I'm doing whatever I want and I don't care what you say. So anyway, thank you so much. I will be here next Tuesday, and Wednesday morning I'm leaving for Africa. So anybody who wants to come, you fly to Cape Town first and then get on a ship and get off in Lisbon. No, Uganda is on. This is Africa here. Uganda is on this side, on the Indian Ocean. And Uganda doesn't have a seaport. It's an inland country. So Uganda doesn't even touch an ocean, so you can't get there by ship anyway. It's on a big lake, but no ocean. No, we're going to be in Namibia. We're going to be in Sao Tome. Oh yeah, there's these islands called Sao Tome. So when the Jews were forced to leave Portugal, the priests, they had a brilliant idea. You know what we're going to do? We're going to take all the children that we can away from the parents and send them to Sao Tome Island along Portugal. As a punishment to Jews who said, oh, we're going to stay here. And so several hundred went there, forced there. They all perished within 5 or 10 years. So we're going to go to that island. It'll be interesting to see. Oh, we're going to Ghana and Ivory Coast, the chocolate capitals of the world. Benin, because it's famous historical monuments. We're going to Gambia, Senegal, Morocco, wow, lots of places along. We miss a few spots like the Congo and places that have Ebola. There's a few no-go type places, so we're not going there. Yeah, so